So far, all of the relationships between the tables that we've been dealing with have been very simple. We've been working with a simple fact table that's dealing with dimension tables directly. In the real world, you can have schemas that are a lot more complex. I want to talk a little bit about different schemas. We have this thing called a star schema, which is what we've been working with primarily, where you have a fact table, as I mentioned, and it's relating directly to these different dimension tables, and the connection there is a foreign key. So the foreign key is in the fact table, and the primary key or unique key that it's pointing to is in the dimension table. There will be times when your fact table needs to relate to a dimension table that's not directly connected to it. So take a look at what we've got here in green. This is what we call a snowflake schema. You might have a fact table which relates to a dimension, which relates to another dimension, and so on. With this kind of snowflake schema, you can create many-to-many relationships. So in this nugget, we'll do a quick review of our star schema, and then we'll also take a look at a couple other scenarios. We have this thing called a referenced relationship, and you can also have a table serve as both a fact and a dimension table. In other words, a table that's self-referencing. We'll also take a look at a many-to-many relationship where you have an intermediate table between the fact and the ultimate dimension. So what I'm going to show you here is how to create that relationship. It's a referenced relationship. So we're just going to create a new project here, and let's just call this indirect relationship, and hit OK. And for our data source, just right click on there. It's good to go through the motions, get more practice here. Here's my existing data connection. If you don't have one, go ahead and create one by hitting this new button and going through the wizard. We can hit next. I'm going to use the service account and hit next, and I'll stick with the default name for the data source name. Once we do that, we have to create a data source view from it. So right click, new data source view, and here's my data source. We hit next, and the fact table that I'm interested in, I'm actually interested in two of them. One is the fact internet sales. You might need to make this a little wider to see what the actual name of the table is. There it is, fact internet sales, and we can add related tables. So you'll see here that there's now this internet sales reason. I don't care about that one. I do care about time eventually. Sales territory, not too concerned with. Don't really care about the promotion either, or the currency. So let's just stick with these tables right here. Now the other fact table that I'm interested in is my reseller sales. So fact reseller sales right here, and I'll add the related tables, which gives us the sales territory. I don't really care about that. I am concerned about the reseller. Don't care about promotion. Don't care about product right now. Remember, you can always add these later if you want to. Don't really care about the employee or the currency. So now we have a collection of tables to work with. I'm going to hit next, and just stick with the default name, and now you should have this nice little diagram. So let's make this a little wider so you can see the relationship between these tables. You'll see here that we have time dimension, reseller dimension, fact reseller sales, fact internet sales, and so on. Now we are missing a particular dimension, and that is our geography dimension. What I'd like to do is show the relationship between the reseller geography and the sales, as well as the customer geography and the internet sales. So the way we can do that, I'm just going to hit that right there. I'm going to right click on cubes. We're going to create a new cube. We'll use existing tables. So our measure group tables are these two fact tables right here. And we'll just check all of these. Doesn't hurt to have them all available. And then we can, let's just keep everything in there. And then hit finish. So once you have that, you'll see that there's all these different dimensions here, but we are missing the geography dimension. So we can just right click on here and say, hey, we've got a new dimension. If the dimension you're interested in does not show up in the drop-down menu, we're interested in geography, then of course we need to add it to our data source view. So let's hit cancel. And I will go ahead and double click on my data source view. There we go. And this icon up here lets us add or remove objects. So we need to find our geography, which is right there. And then we hit OK. So now that that's up there, then we can right click on dimensions and create our new dimension. Geography is now appearing in that drop down, and then we hit next. The things that we're interested in the geography would be the city, state province name, English country region name, and postal code. Hit next, then finish. So now we've got all of these dimensions we can work with. Now we can double click on our cubes, and you'll see that we have our fact table right here. We actually have a couple fact tables. Let's focus on the fact internet sales. Is there a relationship between this fact table and the geography table? Well, at this point, we don't even have the geography table on here. To add a dimension to our existing cube, we can click on this second tab, which is the dimension usage, and you'll see that no, we don't have our geography dimension. So just right click here and add a cube dimension. We're going to call this, we're going to choose dim geography and then hit OK. So there we go. So notice that there's an intersection between these different dimensions and the measure groups. We have our fact reseller sales and our fact internet sales, and there is no relationship between these two. We want to have a relationship between the geography and internet sales. Let's look at our diagram again. Here's our geography, and here's our internet sales, and you'll notice that there's an indirect relationship. The intermediate table is the dim customer. You'll notice that the dim customer has a geography key here, and dim geography also has a geography key. So going back to our tab here, we can click on this little rectangle and we can create a relationship by clicking here, and we get this nice little wizard. Now right now it says that there's no relationship. Let's create a relationship. This is called a referenced relationship because it's in between, it's intermediate. So the intermediate dimension is the dim customer. In other words, that's the table that's in between geography and the fact table. The reference dimension attribute should be geography key. And when we pull this drop down here, we should see the geography key, and since we don't, what we need to do is make sure that the geography key actually appears as an attribute for the customer. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking cancel right here. And we're going to go right back here, and you'll see that here is our dim customer. We can right click on here and we can edit the dimension. You'll see that it's highlighted over here, and all we need to do really is grab the geography key from here. You can right click and say new attribute for column, or you can just drag it over. It's up to you. And there it is. So now we can save this, go back to our cube, and then we can edit this once more. We'll say once again that this is referenced. Here's our customer table, geography key, and now the geography key is showing up here. Materialize, make sure that's checked. That's going to increase your performance, and we hit OK. One more thing we want to do to make sure that this is optimized, we'll go back to our cube here, and we can look at our attributes for dim customer. Here's our geography key. Just right click on here, go to properties, and you should see several properties on here. Make sure that the attribute hierarchy optimized is not optimized, and attribute hierarchy visibility is set to false. We don't need to browse through that. And now you can double click on your customer dimension, and you can right click on your geography key there, look at your properties, and then for the attribute hierarchy optimized, say not optimized. Attribute hierarchy visible will be false, and then scroll a little bit further down until you get to the attribute hierarchy ordered. In other words, we're not going to be browsing through those attributes. We don't need that. Okay, we'll go ahead and save this. One other thing that I'd like to do in my cube is give this a different name. Instead of calling it dim geography, I'm going to call this customer geography. So we'll just rename this here. And let's go ahead and build our project and then test out our cube. I'm going to double click on my cube here, go to my browser. We do want to make sure that we reconnect right there. And here's my customer geography. If I'm interested in the country region name, we can just drag that over there. And if we're interested in the internet sales, I'll just go to the sales amount right here and drag that over into the data section. Okay, so this looks a lot better. We have different numbers. Before, we got the same number all the way down. Let's look at our diagram one more time. So if we go right here, remember, just to recap this, we had an indirect relationship between the geography dimension and our fact table. So our fact table was actually right down here, and the go-between was dim customer. So as I mentioned, we also have this fact reseller sales table, and we have our dim geography. You can see right here that the go-between is the dim reseller. So once again, we would just make sure that we have the same kind of relationship set up. Let's do that real quickly. We want to make sure in our reseller that we have under our attributes the geography key. Oh great, that's already there for us. And then we'll just go right in here and let's look at our relationships. We need one more cube dimension for our geography. I know this says geography, but this is pertaining specifically to the customer geography for the internet sales. So I'm going to right click on here, add a cube dimension. We're interested in the geography. There it is. So our measure group, if we move this over here, remember we want this to be reporting on the reseller sales. So we can click on here, define our indirect relationship. We say referenced. The go-between is the reseller table. And then here's our geography key and geography key. And hit OK. Once again, we go back to our dimension. Under geography here, make sure once again that our geography key, under properties, make sure that that is not optimized. Make sure attribute hierarchy visible is set to false. And set the attribute hierarchy ordered to false as well. This is just to increase your performance. Okay, let's go back to our cube. Let's actually go back to our browser part of the cube, and you'll see that we have our customer geography. Make sure that you hit reconnect just to make sure everything is fresh. Here is the reseller geography. So if you expand this, here's the reseller geography English country region name. You can drag that over there, and then we can find the measure dealing with our fact reseller sales. Let's drag over the sales amount. That looks really nice. Once again, all of these are different numbers, whereas before they would have been the same number across since there wasn't a direct relationship. Just as a reminder, if you want to make the sales amount look a little bit nicer, maybe with the dollar sign and commas where they belong, just make sure you're in your cube, go to the first tab there, and just find the measure that you're interested in modifying. In our case, it's the sales amount for the reseller, and we'll just go to properties, and here's our format string. We'll change that to currency. We'll rebuild this and then test this in the cube browser. Hit our reconnect, and now things look pretty nice. Now there are going to be times when a table serves both as a dimension table and as a fact. In other words, if you take a look at this fact reseller sales table, here we have the sales order number and the sales order line number. The two of those combined makes up the key. And then there's also the product key there. We might want to perform a join on the product name in the product table and basically give a description of what sales took place per sales order and a nice little description of what they purchased. So the way we do that is we create a dimension that has to do with this fact table right here. before we create that dimension, we do want to make sure that the product table is already in our data source view, because we are going to be utilizing that product table to get a description of the product. So I'm going to expand my data source view right here, and you'll see here that I do not have the product table in there. So I'm going to hit this Add Remove Objects icon, and here is my dim product. We'll move that over there and then hit OK. So now product is showing up over there. If we look at our dimensions, here we can just right click on our dimensions. We'll say New Dimension, and we're going to use an existing table, which is our Fact Reseller Sales table. The key columns, we'll just stick with what it already is, which is the sales order number and sales order line number. And then for the name column, this is what actually appears. Let's initially put in here sales order number, or sales order line number rather, and we'll change this in a minute. As far as related tables, nope, we don't care about any of these. The reason why is the only table we're concerned with is the Fact Reseller Sales table itself, nothing else. Then we hit Next. We can uncheck all of these. You'll see that sales order number always remains checking because that's the unique identifier, that's the key. And let's go ahead and scroll down until we see the customer PO number. And then we'll hit Next. We can call this whatever we want. I'm going to call mine Reseller Sales Details, and I'll hit Finish. Okay, so here's my Reseller Sales Details. And let's make sure that the sales order number is highlighted right here. Right click on it to look at its properties. And instead of it having a heading of sales order number, let's give it something more descriptive. We're going to call this Item Description. The reason why we're doing that is because we're going to change the value that's in there as well. Okay, so we're looking for the name column. And this is where we're referencing that product table. So here's the dim product, and we're looking for the English product name. Next, we're going to drag the sales order number from here onto there, and we're just going to change this name to order number. And we're going to make sure that the ordering is, instead of by the name, we're going to make sure it's ordered by the key. Let's go ahead and save what we have so far. The next thing we're going to do is create a hierarchy. It's going to involve the order number and then the item description. And so then when we're browsing our cube, it will show that hierarchy. So once again, this is a user-defined hierarchy. And I'll just call this Reseller Sales. Right click on here, rename it. And we're pretty much finished with this. I'm going to save this and I'm going to deploy it. And the next step, just for fun, we're going to look at our dimension browser and we'll see a result of some of the numbers in there. Okay, so I'm going to click on the browser here and you'll see that we've got this hierarchy. Okay, so here's the order number and here are the items for that order. Now we want to add this dimension to our cube. If you double click on your cube, you'll see that we don't have that dimension on there yet. So the way we can do that is simply right click here and say Add Cube Dimension, and here's our Reseller Sales Details. Okay, so now to test this, we can go ahead and go to our browser, and we'll narrow things down. Instead of getting the whole results, let's narrow things down by resellers. For example, we can go to our dim reseller right here, and we can say, you know what, I'm only interested in the reseller key of 1. So we're just narrowing down our results. And now let's take a look at our reseller sales. So I'll get the sales amount right there, drag it over there, and the dimension that we're interested in is the reseller sales details. So here's our reseller sales hierarchy that we created. So here you can see our hierarchy. We can expand these little components here, and we have the order number, and then if you scroll down we have some more order numbers and then the items that were actually purchased, and you can see all those subtotals. So that's how we make a table be treated both as a fact table and a dimension table. The next thing we're going to do is talk about how to create a many-to-many relationship. Before I show you the many-to-many relationship, it's really helpful to see a diagram of your different tables. So what I want you to do is just double-click on your data source views, if you haven't already done that, and you should see something that looks like this. If you can actually see the attribute names, it's because you're probably zoomed in furthermore than I am. But what's of interest to us is our sales reason table, and that's related to an internet sales reason, which is then linked to the fact internet sales table. What's the relationship between all of these? Well, if we take a look, we're going to hone in here on the internet sales, you'll see that the key is a combination of the sales order number and the sales order line number. For each one of those entries, there is going to be a sales reason. You'll see that in this intermediate table, there's also the sales order number and sales order line number. So that's how these two tables are linked together. And then you'll see for the sales reason that there's a sales reason key here and a sales reason key there. Why have this intermediate table? Why not just combine everything into two tables? Well, the reason for that is that we have a many-to-many relationship. In other words, for each product that was ordered, there might be multiple reasons why that product was ordered. And for each reason there is for ordering a product, there can be many, many products that were ordered for that reason. Hence the many-to-many relationship. If you want to browse through the data in here, you're more than welcome to just right-click on this Internet Sales Reason table, and we'll look at the Explore Data tab, and we can see what some of this data looks like. So here's the combination of the sales order number and the sales order line number. Notice that these two lines here are duplicate entries, and that there's two different sales reasons for ordering it. The next thing we want to do is create a measure group. So if we go to our cube here, double click on that, and we'll just right click on AdventureWorks DW. Here's our, instead of saying new measure, we're going to say new measure group. Okay, so the table that we're selecting from is our internet sales reason, and we'll click OK. If you expand this, you'll see that there's only one measure in there, which is the internet sales reason count. Why is there only one attribute selected? If you look at this table up here, you'll see that there are three columns, but SSAS automatically inspected this table here, and it realized that these first two columns had to do with just foreign key. If we right-click on this and look at properties, you'll also see that the aggregate function is a count instead of sum, and the reason why is the data type for that particular field is a string. Well, you can't sum up strings, so they do a count instead. We're not interested in actually displaying that information, so for performance sake, we will make that false. And now we need to define our dimension. So let's right-click on our dimension here. We'll say New Dimension. Hit Next. We're going to use an existing table, and our table is Sales Reason. The key there is Sales Reason Key, and the name column, which is actually going to be displayed, let's make that be a little more user-friendly. Let's choose Sales Reason Name, and then hit Next. As far as the available attributes, we're just interested in these two guys right here. Let's make this read a little bit better. We'll rename that to Sales Reason Type, and then hit Next, and then Finish. Let's clean this up a little bit. Here's our Sales Reason Key. If you right-click, make sure you hit Properties. Let's just change the name from Sales Reason Key to just say Sales Reason. And we're going to create a nice little hierarchy to display in our cube. So we'll say Reason Type, and then the detailed Sales Reason. I'm going to rename this hierarchy to be Sales Reasons, and make sure you have that selected Sales Reasons. In the All Member name, we can call this just All Sales Reasons. We're just cleaning this up a little bit so it displays nicely in our cube browser. And then we can click on our dimension here and do the same thing. Attribute All Member Name will be all sales reasons. Let's save what we've got so far. And I'm going to double click on my cube here. We've defined our dimension, but we haven't actually created our cube dimension. So right click under here and say Add Cube Dimension. And here's our sales reason. Once we've got that, then the last thing we need to do is just define our many-to-many relationship. So if you just go to the second tab here where it shows us the relationships between the dimensions and the measure groups, if you scroll down, here's our sales reason. You'll see that we have fact reseller sales, fact internet sales, and internet sales reason. Notice that we have a regular relationship here between the sales reason and the internet sales reason. However, we also want to define the many-to-many relationship between the sales reason and the fact internet sales. So you can just click on this column or this cell right here, and we'll specify a many-to-many relationship. And here is our intermediate measure group, which is internet sales reason. We hit OK. At this point, we can test it. So let's save it, and let's deploy it, and then browse through our little cube here. Go to your browser, make sure you hit Reconnect, and the measure that we're interested in is the fact internet sales. So I'm interested in the sales amount. Collapse that guy right there. And then we'll choose our little hierarchy that we created under sales reason. Here it is. Drag this over here. Okay, so you'll see that these are the reason types. So we've got marketing. Under marketing, we have TV advertisement. Under other, we have these different categories and so on. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We talked about the star and the snowflake schemas. Remember, a star schema is just where you have a fact table that's talking directly to a dimension table. This is what we call a regular relationship. We also have a referenced relationship where you have an intermediate table between a fact table and a dimension table. Once again, the way the tables relate with each other is through foreign keys. We also had a table that served both as a fact table and a dimension table. In other words, it was self-referencing. You'll need to remember to go into your Cube Designer and go to the tab that says Dimension Usage to see the relationship between the dimensions and the fact tables. And then the last thing we looked at was our many-to-many relationship. The way we implement this many-to-many relationship is through an intermediate table, and once again, make sure that you have that relationship defined in your Dimension Usage tab. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.